Hi, my name is Sabrina Paul, and it's my pleasure to present to you my interpersonal communication project today. My information is located on the first slide, and my introduction information is located on the second slide, which we will now be looking at. Essentially, I'm a wife, a mother, and also a student. My husband and I, we've been married for 16 years very happily. Together we have 2 children, a 13-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl. I also recently graduated from Liberty University with a degree in professional counseling. And in the future, I hope to use that in private Christian practice to counsel people, particularly those who have experienced trauma. The next slide there talks about why an interpersonal communication project and why that's important. There are some personal reasons, for instance, to increase marital satisfaction, also to increase to better my relationship with my children, also to be a better friend. There's also some professional reasons that the interpersonal communication project is important. For instance, to be a better counselor and improve my skills in that aspect of my life. But maybe even most importantly, to be a better servant of Christ, which listening to others is most definitely an important part of that. In the next slide, I introduce the idea of an overarching goal in enlarging the conversation. And the next slide contains my definition or my goal, my overarching goal for communication in the future. My personal overarching goal is to learn to be a more effective, mindful listener in both personal and professional settings, while also learning to be more outspoken with my true feelings in my personal life, so that those relationships that are most important to me can be enriched. And in the next slide, I want to give a definition of enlarging the conversation that's been built over the course of the last 8 weeks. The Stewart text states that the conversation is the relationship, and I certainly can't help but agree with that statement. And he also describes how meaningless conversation reduces relational opportunities and the relationship itself. So, enlarging the conversation would mean to create more meaningful opportunities in our exchanges with other people, which in turn creates deeper relationships with others. And the next slide introduces the topic of my background and my behavioral blend and how that influences my communication style. In my background, there are 2 distinct aspects of my background that has influenced my communication style. The first was my communication model, which were my parents. They were and are very reserved individuals. They are not comfortable speaking in front of people or meeting new people for the first time. And so as a child, I learned to act similarly in the same kinds of situations. So I do tend to be reserved and not as comfortable speaking in front of people or meeting with new people for the first time. The next slide shows the second of the important background information that has influenced my communication style. Dr. Byrne talked about positive and negative strokes in his book about transactional analysis. And fortunately, my parents were very good at giving me positive strokes and making me feel like what I had to say was very important. Additionally, other figures that were in authority, like teachers and principals and things of that nature, also made me feel the same way. Unfortunately, my peers often made me feel like what I had to say was not as important. And so I'm much more comfortable talking to people who are in authority or who are older than me, but not necessarily people who are approximately the same age. And in the next slide, we'll talk about how my behavioral blend influences my communication style. From the quiz that I took from Uniquely You, in the first graph, I scored an S. And basically what it means is I believe that the following characteristics are expected of me. Things like stability, servitude, loyalty, sensitivity, trustworthiness, peacefulness, timidity, and to be soft-spoken. The second graph revealed that I was an SC, which includes things like passivity, being task-oriented, being a perfectionist, being kind, caring, agreeable, intelligent, quiet, and shy. I also took the Queendom.com interpersonal skills test. I did receive a 96 out of 100 in the insightfulness scale. What this means is that I'm good at getting into the other person's proverbial shoes and seeing things from the other perspective. I prioritize empathy and will do a lot in order to understand the other person's point of view. And I will also make sure that the other person in a conversation is comfortable and understands what's going on in terms of that conversation. So in the next slide, what does this mean for my overarching goal? Based on parts of my background and the results of the 2 communication style quizzes, I'm already a good listener, but this can always improve. However, particularly due to my background, I have quite a bit of work to do with regard to assertiveness in conversation and also self-disclosure. And as the next slide shows, we'll be talking about barriers to better communication. And if you'll go to the next slide, what can keep me from being a better listener? For one, getting caught up in courtroom culture, where both parties are attempting to win the argument. Also giving abrupt advice rather than focusing on other good counseling skills like paraphrasing and heart talk, as Peterson puts it. Also relying on judgments rather than what will actually be said. It's important not to guess what the person has to say and judge it based on that guess. Also, allowing emotionally negative topics to distract me would also keep me from being a better listener. And most importantly, becoming too physically tired to give adequate attention to the speaker would definitely keep me from being a better listener, and this is most definitely an occupational hazard and something that I would like to work on in the future. So how can I overcome these barriers? By embracing the idea of mindful listening and learning to tune out everything else but the person who is speaking. And the next slide, I would like to talk about barriers to self-disclosure. What will keep me from creating more meaningful relationships by sharing more of myself? One study showed that common reasons for not disclosing oneself were inadequate self-worth, problems expressing themselves clearly, a desire not to risk the relationship over the conversation that needed to be had. Those were all good reasons that people cited for not self-disclosing more often. For me, however, I believe that fear has much more to do with the reluctance to self-disclose, such as fear of rejection, fear of starting an argument, and fear that what matters to me will not matter to other people. So how will I overcome the barriers of fear and inadequate self-worth? I need to rediscover the importance of my identity in Christ, and also to remember 1 John 4:18, which states, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." And the next slide defines noise pollution, which is an idea that the level of noise damages the environment and causes harm to both the hearer and the ecological system. It is believed that maladies such as depression, annoyance, addiction, sleep issues, and increased stress could all be exacerbated just by noise. So how does this work into the idea of interpersonal communication? Well, there are external noise pollutions, which would be audible noise in the surrounding areas in which you're trying to have a conversation that can keep you from focusing on the other individual. This could include things like cell phones, music, other people's conversations or noise, construction sounds, or maybe traffic sounds from outside. So ideally, you would want to reduce those as much as possible. There's also internal noise pollution, which is more metaphorical, which is things that go through your mind that keeps you from being able to concentrate on the other person. For instance, thinking about what to say next in response to the talker, thinking about the next point to make after that person stops talking, and thinking about personal things that must be done later. And in the next slide, we begin talking about an action plan. And the next slide talks about the professional portion of that action plan. In order to become a better counselor, I want to focus on becoming a better listener. This will involve using many of the techniques offered in Peterson's text, particularly with regard to the role of the listener. Some of these techniques might be using the double reverse twist after receiving a thud, practicing caution when providing advice, and employing heart talk in this process when advice giving is helpful, and also listening without judgment of the other person. And in addition to practicing Peterson's listening techniques, I will also teach these to individuals and especially couples who are struggling with communication. This may involve coming alongside one of the individuals to help him or her communicate in an appropriate manner. It also may involve using the card that Peterson provided in his text as well. The next slide talks about my own personal action plan for my own life. For instance, I want to use a talker listening card in communication with my husband. I want to work on eliminating the courtroom culture from our communication, and also to play the listening game that he suggests with the whole family at dinner. I think that will all go a long way to helping improve my personal communication. Lastly, I will also begin working towards better self-esteem and greater self-disclosure. First and foremost, this is going to require a lot of prayer for God to reveal to me my own self-worth, and also reveal to me those that are good candidates to start moving towards self-disclosure. It was, as the Stewart text, I believe, said that not everyone is a good candidate for self-disclosure. Also, I will consciously begin to take turns in the talker role and encourage others to truly hear what I have to say. And I will also share my true thoughts and feelings with those who have been deemed appropriate for this task. And by doing so, I'll be able to enrich and develop more meaningful relationships with the people who matter most to me. Thank you so much for viewing my presentation, and good luck and God bless.